Well, hello, and Tricia said that I have a whole new role, and I do. I am the principal at Pine Grove Learning Center this year. It just opened this September, and it is actually an extension of Lincoln School. The intermediate school district took a survey of all the parents. Lincoln was so full, they didn't even have a teacher's lounge. It's just every place that could be taken by kids was. And so they did a survey, found out where the need was, and it happened to be in that what we call Region 3 area, and that's Wyoming, Kellogg'sville, parts of Kentwood, Byron Center. And so they decided to build a school. So the ISD built the building. It is ISD owned and run with maintenance, and it has Grand Rapids Public School employees in it. So Grand Rapids Public Schools is who hires the people in it, and the kids are considered Grand Rapids Public School students. Now, I don't know, the same is for Lincoln. If you realize that center-based, whether that's center-based in emotional impairments, center-based in cognitive or multiple impairments like the building that I'm in, they get a per pupil funding just like every other student does. So on count day, the kids are counted and they get the allotment that the state gives for per pupil funding. But local districts pay more according to what Grand Rapids, the ISD, and the locals have determined for the kids to go there because it costs more. It costs more to send the students to center programs. And much of that is because there's so many more services involved. OT, PT, speech, and we'll go through all of those different services, as well as nursing for us. We have a pool, so you have extra staff when it comes to the pool. So to put a student into a center-based program, their needs need to be pretty high. And the local district, be that Wyoming or Byron Center, needs to say, yeah, we can't meet their needs in our district. And center, we need to send this child to a center program. Now, center is the most restrictive special ed program. So districts don't do that lightly because federal and state law mandate that you give students the least restrictive environment. Least restrictive is in their own classrooms, in their home schools. That is, for special ed students, the least restrictive environment. And it goes the whole spectrum all the way to center-based program. Every student we have in the school is special education. So that's a very restrictive environment. So that's kind of the history of when I say center, you understand what center means. And we have center EI programs. Those are the KECs, KEC Mayfield, Beltline, and Oakley. And we have a POHI center program as well as preschool center programs. Grand Rapids runs them all. And then they're sort of monitored by the intermediate school district because kids from all over Kent County go to those programs. I'm going to give you a little bit of history or a little bit of background on just what kinds of special ed students, what are the different labels. First, I'm going to talk to you about what kind of qualities, if you're looking to go into special ed, that I see when I interview, what I'm looking for in a potential candidate to be employed in my building. First of all, it needs to be apparent you love kids, and I look for that. When I look on a resume for somebody who loves kids, I'm looking for different experiences you've had that involved you with all kinds of kids, whether that's babysitting or some of the other volunteer opportunities that I'm going to bring up here, that you've been involved in working with kids. That this isn't your first exposure, because I can pretty much guarantee you're going to be overwhelmed if you walk into my building and it's your first kind of try with kids. You have to really, really love kids. And I think even if you're walking into a general ed building and you want to work with learning disabled kids, they all pose challenges that you need to have patience with kids of all kinds. So that's one of the things I look at. Patience, it's huge. I can't say anymore. It's just with special ed, you can't be frustrated easily. You have to be able to have the patience to wait. Patience for behaviors, flexibility. We're moving all the time. things change, not only in special education, but even in your day. A student, and I've been through the district. My experience in the district is I've been working for Grand Rapids Public Schools for 25 years, and I have been in the district in a capacity in special ed. I have done team taught classrooms with 6th graders and 1st graders. I have been in an LD room, self-contained, resource rooms. I have been in preschool rooms, 2-year-old rooms. I have been in self-contained POHI rooms, physically or otherwise health impaired. So I've kind of been around as well as now in the center. So I talk a lot about what my experience is now, where I am now, but when I made this PowerPoint, it really generalizes through, it doesn't matter what setting I was in. These things happen in every setting, whether you're working with special ed kids in a general ed environment, or whether you're working with special ed kids in a center-based environment. All of these are pretty common traits. Perseverance and energy. Energy is pretty high up there too, and just being able to stick with it and keep going and keep going. You don't always get a lot of feedback, especially in the center-based program, but you don't see kids make these big jumps, these big gains. So if you're in regular education and you're teaching kindergarten, you begin to see kids get it. You know, you get, I'm doing something right, this is great. When you're working with special education kids, sometimes if you do see the progress, it's 2 steps forward and 3 back. Or you don't, in the environment we're in now, that progress is very minimal. You really have to search it out. You really have to be looking in all areas to see where a student's making progress, because it's very small with a lot of our kids. Acceptance of paperwork. Special ed is pretty much synonymous with paperwork. That is what we are. IEPs, METs, reports. It is, you have to just try not to let that consume you and overwhelm you. It is what it is. It's paperwork. It's requirement, whether you see it as valuable or not. You need to be able to accept it, understand it, and just deal with it. Because it's been that way as long as I've been in special ed. It's just paperwork. People skills. You work with a lot of different people in special ed. You have agencies, you have group homes, you have parents, you have foster parents, you have homes that have step parents, you have peers, related service people, OT, PT, speech, social workers. You are in contact with people all the time and doing a lot of talking all the time. It's not to your kids, it's to the staff and their families involved and the people involved with them. So being able to work with all different kinds of people is really important. The ability to work with behavior is actually, I didn't rate these according to their importance. Behavior seems to be something that in my experience has grown, being able to deal with behavior. Having a knack for having patience and understanding behavior. Because in every special ed disability area, even kids in wheelchairs, there's behavior. And it just, I don't know why it seems to get worse, and I don't know why I don't believe it's any worse than general ed, but kids in general are testing all the time. And it doesn't, whether they can talk or not, or whether they can move or not, doesn't make them exempt from that. So, all right, student with a disability. And these will give you some of the terminology that go along with them. So when you hear the terminology, you will hear LD. And we in education love letters. So you will hear these terms. You'll hear LD child, not learning disabled child. So LD child, if you're LD, these are the different areas that we qualify students for a disability. This is what an IEP, an individualized education plan, will qualify students who get services. They're going to be one of these areas. LD, EI, emotional impairment, CI, cognitive impairment, which, by the way, CI carries with it. They're just called CI now, cognitively impaired. That's what they qualify for based on testing and IQ scores. They then are put into a program that makes that a little bit narrower, and we'll talk about that program. But they're called CI. PI, this was changed. I told you I was in a POHI classroom. It used to be called POHI. It is PI and OHI now. Physical impairment is if a child has spina bifida, cerebral palsy, and they are cognitively high enough to be in the regular ed environment. Then they would be often given a PI endorsement, and then it tells a different story than SXI will, which we'll talk about later. But PI is just, it has that physical, and they need services connected with that physical impairment. So they might really need PT. So PI will help get them the physical therapy that they need. OHI, there's otherwise health impaired, and these are where our ADD kids are falling. Attention deficit disorder is considered an other health impairment. So, and kids who need services for that, if they're falling behind in school and it's determined that they need services, will fall under that. But there's other, I can't really think of them. ADD is the big one. But there might be some other disabilities that don't have a physical, but might have just some kind of effect on the child's learning that they need some services. Early childhood developmental delay, that's where our young children come into to get services. Autism spectrum disorder, very much a growing disability area. And in my experience has been I don't know how statistics are showing, and I should look that up, but it's the biggest growing area, and it ranges from students who have Asperger's syndrome, which is high, in the spectrum, it's a higher functioning autistic student who might have some skills in reading and math and be able to, but just have some real, they're kind of oddities, some neurological weaknesses, all the way to the kids that we have in the center-based program. And typically those kids are worked on with communication, picture schedules. They have OT because the ASD kids in our building need help with self-care. And what goes along with that is social, emotional, and behavior. Behavior is huge. We have the whole range. We have kids in the center program that are so aggressive they cannot be in the general ed setting. That's a reality you need to know if you decide to go into ASD, that you're tough, because you need to be tough. And even for some of the kids that we have that aren't ASD, you just need to know that those days when we've got an autistic student who is severely cognitively impaired, and their way of communicating is to shove you 4 feet, you got to know you're going to be able to take that. That's their way of communication. Now you're going to work with that, and it's up to your staff and your administrator to help you work with that. But you have to, ASD, there's a certain amount of toughness, and those kids are tough. Those are probably one of the most challenging, because they don't, groups of kids. So they really need patient understanding, and you can really make progress with them, but you have to be able to take some of that stuff. There's HI, hearing impaired, in our center program is Shawnee Park. That's where all of our HI students go. A visual impairment, those kids are scattered all over the county. Some of them, we have a couple in center because they have a cognitive impairment to go along with that. But most of the time, VI kids are in their own schools in the general ed setting. Speech and language impaired, you'll see a lot of kids in general ed the whole time, and all they do is get speech and language support in having a speech and language impairment. Severe multiple impairment, those kids are usually in the buildings I have, the center programs, because they need nursing, because they have a cognitive impairment along with a severe physical impairment that affects everyday life. So in our building, we have students who are SXI, who do a little talking and kind of get around the building, just need some assistance with daily living skills, toileting, eating, all the way to a student who we give oxygen to and suction hourly because she might turn blue or she's struggling to breathe. They have a right to an education along with, and boy, it's tough because you don't know she's there. Is she there? Is she not there? There's where your patients come in. You can't really tell, and you have to really work hard on goals for those kinds. But those medically fragile students are in our buildings too, and they are part of that SXI. So you got that whole range. So in our building, SXI ranges from somebody who may seem just like not there, totally to kids who are very interactive and playful and have maybe a little bit of speech, or that's the range in that SXI group. TBI, traumatic brain injury, kids who have had some kind of either at birth or some kind of accident that they need services because their education is being affected, they can be given a TBI. And there's the deafblind, kids who are deafblind. Okay, now these are the programs. I explained all of those areas, or everything that's on an IEP that we qualify students for special ed. Now, these are the programs into which they would be. Oh, I don't know, doesn't like that. I don't know what happened to my picture. These are all the programs that we place students in. A student's disability level, certification doesn't mean it has to match the program. The program they're put in is what best meets their needs. So we have some kids who are severely multiply impaired who might be in a severe cognitive impairment program. The programs we have at Pine Grove are severe cognitive program, SCI, severe multiple impairment, SXI, and ASD, or autism. Those are the 3 programs that are in our center base. And Lincoln has one more, and that's, they call them MOSI. The cognitive impairment label that a student gets divides into 2 programs. Kids who are severely multiply impaired, well, actually 3, moderately cognitively impaired and mildly cognitively impaired. So a student gets services because they're cognitively impaired. Now, how cognitively impaired are they? If they're severe, they're in a center-based program. Usually those kids are being taught toilet training. They're being taught to communicate with sign or pictures. And even into their 20s, we have young men who are not yet toilet trained. Another thing when you're going to, you never know where you're going to end up. If you go into special ed, you just never know where you're going to end up. You could be in a resource room 1 year and in a center-based program 10 years down the road. Because if you're in a place where you can move around, you also, if you go into a different state, Michigan has the most comprehensive special ed laws of any other state. I mean, we take our special ed services to age 26. People will move to Michigan when their kids are 21 so they can have services till they're 26. Michigan tends to be the state that just takes one step better than the federal government. Why we do that, I'm not sure, because it costs money, but they do. The federal government says you will do this, and Michigan takes it one step better. So we have pretty good special ed programs, pretty comprehensive. Usually districts will share regional programs. Byron Center, Wyoming, Kellogg'sville will share, and they may not have enough moderately cognitively impaired kids in each district to have a classroom, so they'll share and bus them to one district. So you'll find that Byron Center hosts the moderately cognitively impaired program for Caledonia, Wyoming. They share like that. Same thing with autism programs in the regional, we call those regional programs. And that's what they do to keep them in the regular environment, but they don't have enough kids to have their own classrooms in their own districts. You get further away from here, north of here, sometimes to smaller districts or different states, and you could walk in as a special ed teacher into a classroom that might have a little bit of everything in it. A little bit of SXI, a little bit of SCI, a MOSI student. So you need to realize that it doesn't, as pure as everything can be here, and especially locally in Kent County, it doesn't mean that it's that way across the board. So being able to, if you come out of school with an LD certification, you could walk into an LD room and you could have EI kids, you could have emotionally impaired kids, you could have a CI child thrown in there, because they just don't have, that district just doesn't have enough resources to spread them, to have their own classrooms. I'm losing my pictures. don't know why I did that. Categorical self-contained, these are types of classrooms. These are the classrooms. Grand Rapids doesn't have very many of these anymore. They've gone away from self-contained classroom. 25 years ago, they had rooms that were all day. LD kids were in there all day. EI kids were in there all day. Government mandates from the state have made that not to your benefit to do. You need to prove that your kids are in the least restrictive environment and are spending time in that environment. So these classrooms don't help you get funding. So they have pretty much gone down to nothing. Center-based, which I talked about, is where I am. Resource room, they have lots of those, kids coming and going. Or resource rooms pushing into classroom. Team taught. I was in a room at Kenosha where I had 36 sixth graders. It was me as a special ed teacher. I had a regular ed teacher in there, and we had a parapro because my classroom was mandated to have a parapro. And 10 of those kids were physically or otherwise health impaired, and then 26 of them were regular ed. But in that regular ed was kids who qualified, who had IEPs for being emotionally impaired but just needed resource help. Kids who were LD just needed resource help. So we had 36 kids all day. And levels that went from my POHI kids might have a first grade cognitive or academic level all the way up to your gifted sixth graders. That was fun. It was fun. And I guess that's another thing education has done, is gone kind of away from, we did a team taught room or a thematic room on the rainforest. So we took the standards that were sixth grade at the time, we kind of adapted them, made them fit into the rainforest, and we had a little rainforest in our room, and so we had a theme. You can't really do that stuff anymore because there's so many mandates, and the learning disabled kids and the EI kids have to adhere to those. And there's adapted curriculums for them, but it's tougher. You know, teaching is not easy, and special ed is not easy either, because you really have to keep up with those regular ed mandates, and they make sure you do now. You can't be in your own little world anymore, teaching your passion and having kids grow. It just, the requirements in education, the pacing, the testing, all they are pretty big ticket items. They talk to you ad nauseum about that stuff. How can you determine if this job is for you? I would recommend that you try to get out there and go to Special Olympics. That's a big one. I did that when I was in college. Very Special Arts is another one. That's out at Lincoln School every May. They're always looking for volunteers. You get a pretty good sampling of what special ed is in Kent County when you go out to VSA, because that includes EI kids, LD kids, the kids at Lincoln, and everything in between. And it's fun, as long as it's not cold and rainy. Explore different things, like volunteer at a school. Carnivals for field days and carnivals at schools are where, Pine Grove, Lincoln Developmental, all of those, they're always looking for volunteers for certain times during the day where kids need one-on-one. That will give you the center base, but I would encourage you too to get out to your general ed schools and see if there's any kind of tutoring, or there's Big Brother, Big Sister programs and tutoring programs that will get you to that other end of the spectrum than center. There's lots of center-based volunteer opportunities, but go to your regular elementary school. Go to, find out if you have any classrooms in a local middle school or high school that you can help do tutoring. It just helps you kind of get to know the different environments. There's camps. Indian Trails is out there, and so is Muscular Dystrophy Camp. Hey, their pictures are back. Now these are all the different areas that, other than teacher, what I've given you is maybe some background on what special ed is And then these are all the different other roles, and we call them related services. There is school psychologist. You can go to school for psychology and be a psychologist, but to be a school psychologist is extra. And I am sorry, but I really don't know the extra. I should have asked my school psychologist before I came, but it's something different that makes a school psychologist different from a psychologist. I don't think it's a lot of time, but it is something different at that point. Teacher, occupational therapist. An occupational therapist works with feeding skills, eating, adapted spoons, adapted cups for kids who are physically impaired. Along with an occupational therapist, which is a 4-year program, there is also, which I believe they give here at CC, is a CODA program, a Certified Occupational Therapist Assistant. I have a CODA who works full-time at Pine Grove, and she is supervised by an occupational therapist who is there 1 day a week. The occupational therapist is the one who helps develop goals and objectives for the IEP, and she it just more or less supervises that CODA. The CODA is the hands-on person. She's there every day. The difference and there's a difference in pay because of a difference in education level, and her responsibility level is a little less than the occupational therapist who has more of that paperwork stuff. But big with the CODAs and occupational therapists is the whole new field of sensory. Last time I talked, a year ago, I talked about sensory. Sensory is very much a growing area in special education for the whole spectrum of special ed. If you can get experience and understand sensory motor and sensory processing, and it has its whole, we have a sensory room, a multi-sensory room at Pine Grove, as does Lincoln and LDC, that has fiber optic lights and bubble columns. It's all I can do to keep my staff from staying out of the padded chairs, and you turn the lights off and there's aromatherapy and there's music. It's cool. It's meant to do 2 things. One is for our ASD populations. For some of our autistic kids, it will calm them, for some of them. It really initially was meant for our SXI population, and it stimulates the fiber optics. You think if you're in a chair and you maybe move your head a little bit and you don't have a lot of control over your limbs, this helps stimulate your neurological system with lights and sound and smells, things that you're giving to that child to help stimulate their neurological system. But there's other types. Sensory also deals with behavior. We have a student in the building who is about 14 and big as a truck and very aggressive. He's learned that he gets what he wants or doesn't want by throwing his weight around. And it's mostly females in the building. He can throw his weight around and send you flying. So part of the sensory program for him is understanding what his body as an autistic student is seeking. And for him in particular, it's a therapy ball that he sits down and he just wham, wham, bounces off it. But he's getting input, we call it, through that, and it will calm him. The occupational therapist assistant helped us to assess him and figure out what it is. Some kids work with squish balls. Some kids it's a tramp. And the EI programs in the district rely heavily on sensory programs. Kids who are cognitively higher learn to put themselves through a program every day to try to keep their neurological systems going. When I was teaching in a resource room, I would have kids go through a sensory program every day. I think kids developing neurological systems are not developed as they used to be when we were younger. We used to roll down the grass. We used to go on merry-go-rounds. We used to be on swings. Well, some of that stuff isn't even on the playground anymore. And our neurological systems just don't get, and kids who are in the city, and kids who are in wheelchairs, and kids who can't ever be left alone, don't ever get that to help their neurological systems develop. So I think there's a little bit of a delay, and they're seeking something, and if they don't get it, it's not conscious, they're gonna get it some way. And if it's shoving somebody, they're gonna get input that way. So sensory is really a big part of, if anybody's had any kind of sensory experience when I look at a resume, it's always pulling that one out first, because it's very much something needed in all programs. You've also got a physical therapist, and we have a physical therapist assistant that works at Pine Grove, and he is supervised by a PT. That's the mobility, strength, endurance, stretching for kids who are in chairs. He helps do the range of motion. For some of our SCI kids, he rides a bike with them because they don't get much exercise, or he goes on a treadmill with them. Endurance and exercise, that's what our PT, outside of fixing wheelchairs and, strollers. Speech and language therapist. There is a shortage of speech and language therapists. We have been without one for the first part of this year, which is not a good thing because they just aren't out there. It's a master's level program, and you have to do your undergrad in it. And there's not a lot of colleges that were offering that. I heard a rumor that Grand Valley was going to start coming up here, and I thought it was either Calvin or Aquinas, I'm not sure which one, that they were going to start speech and language. They're highly sought after right now in all areas. I mean, the reason why schools can't get them is because they pay less, and private therapies pay much more. So, and that speech and language therapy it's different depending on where you're at. In the center program, it's all about communication and switches and pictures and learning to communicate when you don't talk. And in an LD environment, in a general ed building, that is going to be teaching kids to process language and understand it. So it's going to be a little bit different. Did I cover them all? The things that I just put down here for you to remember are just that I did mention that districts structure their special education programs differently. And just because we have a center-based program that might have SCI and SXI kids, you go to a different state or a different county and you're going to have that that could be different according to the size. I think I mentioned all the things to remember. And I will open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Taylor?
Can you explain the Indian Trails?
Indian Trails is located out on off of Lake Michigan Drive, and it's a camp that the kids go to. It's a special needs camp. I think if you Googled it, you might come up with it. Otherwise, call me and I can get you a connection. And it's during summer, week-long programs that parents take advantage for their kids out there.
In your experience within a special ed environment, what types of software has been made available to LD kids or kids struggling with their reading and writing?
Wow, there is a lot of technology, and I have been out of that part so long. I mean, I've been gone from LD probably 7 years. And it depends on the technology budget of your district. But the Kent Intermediate School District has a person specifically designated to help you connect with technology. So like at my level, it's Board Maker, because we're all about pictures and printing pictures. For an LD student to help them learn to read, or I know there's software that speaks. I know it's out there, and there's a lot of it. And using your intermediate school district is your best bet, because she's employed to find technology. And then there's in-service offerings for teachers for technology. It's Kindy Segovia. Mm-hmm.
The S or
S, Kindy, Kindy Segovia. She's at the ISD.
And so if a child does move here from Illinois at the age of 21, you won't turn down for services for those 5 years?
No, we cannot.
Because I'm in a situation where I have a stepson in Illinois. Their services are in 21.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you thinking of going into special ed, Michigan is a better state. Illinois has the least amount of money spending for students.
As long as the IEP comes with them, and they will redo a MET, the retesting for initial evaluation. They will redo that here, and if he meets the criteria here for a learning disability, he will continue to receive services. Yep.
I was looking for have you ever heard of Head Start program?
Mm-hmm.
Is that categorized? How do you get involved?
Head Start isn't necessarily special ed. back in my preschool days, there was Head Start in Oakdale that I worked at. But it was more run by, not the schools. Head Start isn't run by the public schools. It's run by social, and that changes so much. Who runs what? I mean, between Spectrum, Thresholds, and trying to blank. Spectrum, Threshold, and there's one other one. Those services, they're moving targets is how they provide them and how much they provide. When funding's low for social services, they go way down is what they offer. So how you get involved with Head Start, I'm not sure, and I don't even know of the availability here immediately.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was
Sorry.
something you can get involved in.
I'm sure if you called a district and asked in one that you were interested, do you have Head Start or do you know of Head Start, the district will know. The student services part of the district will know. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, well I hope I covered what you guys needed to know, and it was a pleasure.